Warning: this podcast contains adult material and is not suitable for anyone under the age of 18. You have been warned. Do you like movies?
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe fuck yourself.
What do you think about horror movies? Blood, guts, and mayhem.
Groovy.
Then sit back, relax, and listen to the Dead and Rotting Podcast. And welcome to the Dead and Rotting Podcast. Because you chose this podcast and you're listening to it right now, I assume that you like horror and all things horror, or really into horror, or you like horror. Shit. So, what are we going to do on this podcast? Well, one, we're going to be looking at some movies very closely and critiquing them. And next, we'll be doing some interviews, hopefully very, very soon, with some folks who are in, on, around, and or created horror movies. Now, not just the big budget stuff like that comes out of Hollywood. And I would imagine that the majority of the people that we talk to are going to be more on the indie film side. But hopefully, it'll sort of give you an idea of what's going on behind the scenes. And that's always fun. So let's start off with some critiquing. Here we go. For my first foray into the horror movie critiquing, I chose the 1989's The Vineyard. I don't know why I chose this movie in particular. When I added it to my to-be list, I remember thinking that I had seen the cover of the movie before. Perhaps I saw the VHS in the rental store sometime when I was but a lad. It could be that I chose this movie like I do most movies that I watch. I run the movie through my small checklist of things that I like seeing. Number 1, is it low budget? Number 2, is it made in the 1980s? Number 3, is it horror? That pretty much sums up my criteria for most of my movie preferences. As you can tell, this is a pretty narrow scope of things that I like to see in my movies. Yes, I do watch movies way outside of this narrow range, just not very often. Maybe I chose this movie because of the cool-looking artwork for the cover, sort of like a lot of those spooky-looking book covers that came out in the 80s and 90s. For whatever reason, The Vineyard is the first movie I will talk about and really grind into here. The summary. According to the to-be summary of The Vineyard, the movie is about a wine grower obsessed with youth, lures young victims to his remote island with the twisted hope of retaining their effervescence energy. I say that's probably the best summary that could ever be used to sum up this movie. For some reason, though, this movie really fails to show us much of a vineyard. There's more of a mansion, its dungeon, and the island in which all this craziness takes place. Maybe the title should be The Island or The Dungeon. Those titles really encapsulate all the places we see in the movie. The James Hong connection. Probably the craziest thing about the movie for me is James Hong's hand in it. After doing some research on The Vineyard, I was surprised to discover that not only was James Hong in the movie, the guy behind the hideous mask on the cover art, but he also co-wrote and co-directed this flick. Strange how some great actor got into doing something like this. Even stranger that the stuff that is in the movie came from the imagination of James Hong. It's a head-scratcher for sure. But after some research, I found that he also directed the 1979 movie Teen Lust. So, things are starting to make a bit more sense here. Plus, if you look at over his 400-plus movie credits, you'll discover very quickly that he's been in some stinkers over the years. The specs. Made with a budget of just $250,000, The Vineyard earns its low-budget badge for sure. This might also explain why there's so little gore throughout the movie, and anytime there's any kind of gore or possible gore, the camera kind of turns away. Maybe James Hong needed a bigger cut for his paycheck, so that cut into the FX budget, maybe, I'm not sure, but the world may never really know. Since it is put in the category on Tubi as horror, we can safely say that it is in the horror genre. The original release date was July 21st, 1989, only months away from leaving the beloved 80s. It looks like it was probably all filmed at the winery in California. Shocker, I know. The Vineyard also runs at a moderate 1 hour and 35 minutes. Moderate compared to what, I just don't know. This beast was also written by 3 human beings: Harry Mock, Douglas Kondo, and the best for last, of course, is James Hong. It was directed by James Hong and William Rice. Spoilers as we move ahead. Let's get to the meat of it. And man, oh man, is it sleazy. If you are looking for some nudity and softcore porn scenes, well, you can find some in the Vineyard. In fact, most of the movie seems to be centered around how attractive each victim is, and also it seems that each person is just dying to jump in the sack with someone else. And what could be more sexually charged than James Hong as Dr. Elson Poe putting the moves on his wife or girlfriend that is clearly 30 years younger than him? The answer? Literally anything could be more sexually charged. Anything. But, despite your wildest James Hong fantasies, we only see him without his shirt, kind of. However, things get pretty steamy pretty quickly as Dr. Poe gives his woman friend a massage right at the beginning of the movie. Then, post-sexy time, Poe has to run out of the room because his handsome 60-year-old self quickly fades and becomes a hideously disfigured old man. Leaving his bed for only a few moments to go get a drink of some captive woman's blood mixed with all kinds of stuff made with a wine drink, gives his lady friend time to go and bone the island mechanic. So after Poe drinks his magic wine and calls out to some Mayan god, why Mayan when later on Poe is said to be Chinese? Who knows? His youth is returned. Then Poe and his heterochromia right-hand man, which one eye is normal and the other eye kind of has that milky stuff on it, gets a chance to catch the mechanic doing some sexy work to Poe's lady friend. Instead of getting upset, Poe and his buddy watch these two uberly attractive people perform a softcore erotic scene. At this point in the movie, it's like 7 minutes in, I'm reminded again that James Hong helped to write and direct this. Anyways, the mechanic ends up getting his ass kicked by the heterochromia man, and next morning, and Poe's lady friend, what happens to her? Well, she joins the other pretty attractive women and one average-looking mustache dude in shackles placed in the dungeon. We soon find that this is also the weird-looking eye guy's play place. Well, play place with the girls. Back in probably LA, our main protagonist, though I'd much rather think that Poe is our protagonist, but whatever. The appropriately named Jezebel is getting close to some kind of film producer. This really bothers her love interest as she doesn't see the point of sucking up to producers to finally get a break, but this producer does give her and her friends a break, because this producer tells them about Dr. Poe. He tells them Dr. Poe has a movie on his private island and needs them to come in order to perform for him. Since Jezebel and her group of friends decide that this isn't weird or creepy at all, they all hop on a boat and head to the island of Dr. Poe. Once on the island, the group of friends with our Jezebel are preparing for their parts. We don't actually ever know what the movie that Poe is supposedly shooting is about. In fact, we never see the characters try out or work on the movie. But what we do get is a wacky, crazy 80s style dance where Poe has on a crazy mask and dances around. I assume that this really was James Hong under the mask and not his stand-in or some such, even though some of those moves were a bit much for the then maybe 60s age James Hong. I don't know. Eventually, we come to understand that in order for Poe to stay his youthful 60s, he has to have a steady supply of blood that mixes with some magical stuff, including a piece of jade that he keeps around his neck. How does he keep the steady supply of blood? Well, fooling really attractive women and some handsome dudes, too, into coming into his secluded island and making movies. But unfortunately for these super hot people, Poe captures them and puts them in chains in his dungeon. They only get to hang there and whine about having their blood taken and turned into age-defying Poe juice. During this time, Poe spends with our beloved main characters. He begins to fall for Jezebel. We never really understand why, but Poe really wants her. And he wants her to be his wife. And instead of just asking her, because honestly Jezebel really seems entranced by Poe without him using magic on her, he has to do some elaborate ritual that will seal her to him forever or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but then again, there was no solid answers given. Back inside of Poe's home, though, throughout this time, we find that there's a secret room with something hideous in there. It looks like Poe with his true old and gruesome face, only it's feminine. We soon find out, as Poe starts to the wifing ritual, that his ghoul is actually Poe's mother. So like Poe and his mom are like hundreds of years old or something, and he found out the secret of staying young by doing some strange magic ritual. Also, his mother is sort of magic. Are you getting this? I'm lost, and I watched the whole damn movie. Also, I forgot to mention there are zombies. Apparently, when Poe gets done with you, and drains you, he buries you in the vineyard. Because Poe is also a world-renowned winemaker on top of everything else. That never really comes up at all. Well, not really that often. Anyway, the zombies. Yeah, so people Poe kills and his henchmen bury, they tend to come back and won't stay buried. And from time to time, they have to put them back down by covering them with dirt or blowing dirt on them or something to do with dirt. It makes sense if you don't think about it. Anyway, like 3 of Jezebel's friends, one being her lover or wannabe lover, foil Poe's plan to turn Jezebel into the love slave for Poe for all eternity. They end up rescuing the people in the dungeon, and everyone seems to be pretty okay at the end. I mean, except for the people who were killed. They just stayed dead. In conclusion, as all over the place as this movie is, it was actually pretty enjoyable. I may be a pretty easy person to please when it comes to movie cheese, but I think this movie was interesting in a strange way enough to pull me in for an hour and a half anyway. Again, the James Hong thing is still weirding me out, but I guess that's just because of the characters he's played in other movies I've seen him in. Doesn't mean that James Hong, the actual human, can't, from time to time, write and direct some lusty smut. Maybe he started the idea for this movie off with, how can an old dude, get a hot younger chick to show me her titties? The one thing that this film lacked, though, was equal representation. And by that, I mean we didn't see no dude dicks. No male nudity. Maybe a partial butt cheek, but come on. Women get naked, gotta have the guys there too, right? As I reflect even more on the movie, I like the idea that they are going with the magician-like person and such that Poe is, could extend his life by using other people's blood as the key ingredient. I just don't think the way that they executed this version of the set it really works. If we had him just sort of randomly picking people off some lunatic, that might be interesting. I understand why they probably didn't make him a slasher since the 80s and Jason and Michael Myers were really popular. But there has to be some way to spin this story a little better. Also, as a production deal, a lot of times it seems like we've just should have cut some scenes off. There were so many that I recall wondering, were Poe and the other characters done talking? I think we were, but the cameras are still rolling. And sometimes the characters are saying nothing at all and not really doing anything worth us watching it. But we're just have to watch them. We're forced to. At some point, I wonder if they just didn't let James Wong just make up his lines as he went along. It certainly seemed that way. Very strained dialogue from a group of not-so-great actors. How could this movie have been better? Maybe have Poe be a much younger guy who works in a vineyard. He secretly takes tourists off the beaten path while they come to the winery for samples. When he gets them to where he wants them, he drains them and uses their blood for his ritual. Then we could have the owner of the winery's son have a weekend with her friends, and Poe thinks that he's suddenly going to get a bunch of blood bags for his ritual. But then the teens drunkenly discover a dead body, and now Poe has to quickly kill them. As they try to get away, now Poe and maybe Poe's followers must stop the kills and kill them one by one. I don't know. See, I made it better. If only Hong had asked me for help, when he was writing this, we could have made a quality movie. But I was only 4 when this came out, so I guess we'll never get a better version of The Vineyard. Unless someone wants to give me some money and the rights, and I'll write a script and direct a new Vineyard movie. I just ain't doing it on spec. Well, that's it for our first episode. Please stay tuned as we start churning these out once a week. We have some interviews coming on and some more reviews of some old 80s movies and just horror movies in general. So if you like what you hear, stick with us. Give us a like. Give us a follow. You can find us on Instagram at Dead and Rotting Podcast. You can also send us an email at deadandrottingpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you've got a movie that you want us to promote. If you're an indie movie maker, I know that it's hard to get your stuff out there, but I'll sure as hell promote it on here, and maybe we can even do an interview. If you'd like to do an interview, send me an email. If you would like for me to review a specific movie, let me know about that too. Anyway, hope you have a good day and a good week. I'll see you next time.